Hello and welcome to another CADimensions Tech Tip. My name is Jesse. Well, if you came to our 2018 Rollout events, you saw Kevin and I do a tips and tricks session, which is always one of our favorite sections to present. We were asked a number of times if we would record these, so here's my set of tips from our session. We found this model a little ways back on GrabCAD, and we thought it was fitting, given that the catchphrase for this year's 2018 release is designed to manufacture. This 5-axis desktop machine has some pretty cool little parts in it, and I'm going to focus on this one in particular. Here we see that when I open up this part, it is an imported part. This was originally drawn in SOLIDWORKS, but it's been saved out as a step file. And there's a couple tweaks that I'd like to make. So this case study, we're going to remove these pockets that are on the back side, and we're going to make something slightly different. Of course, we could go through the process of importing these to try to get some sketches to work with, but we'll say that this is going to be different enough that the sketches wouldn't really help us too awfully much. Now, the tool that I need initially is called the Delete Face tool, and that can be found on the Direct Editing tab of the Command Manager. I don't have that tab on, so of course I could go up here, right-click, and turn on my Direct Editing toolbar, but in this case I just need one tool off the toolbar to get going, so I'm just going to search for this manually. Now, the Search Commands tool is one that I turn on almost instantly when I set up a new version of SOLIDWORKS and switch this over from SOLIDWORKS Help to Search Commands. One of my favorite things about the Search Commands is it also works in conjunction with the S key keyboard shortcut. If I select S on my keyboard, we'll see that the standard shortcut toolbar does pop up wherever my cursor is, but you'll see that my cursor is also flashing in the Search Commands. So from wherever I am in the graphics area, I can hit S and just start typing for the tool that I'm looking for. In this case, I'm looking for Delete Face. So as I'm typing, we see that it's filtering through all of the tools available in SOLIDWORKS. I wish every software I used had this option. From here, I can use the arrow keys to navigate. If it's the top one, I can just hit Enter, or you can use your mouse to select any one of the tools available. Here I'll select Enter, and we'll launch the Delete Face tool. Now, I won't get too in-depth with the Delete Face tool in particular, but you can see that the Delete Face has 3 different options. In this case, I'm going to use Delete and Patch. Now, one of the things that I recommend to users is if you're using at least a modern version of SOLIDWORKS, SOLIDWORKS is constantly bringing tools to you as you're working through the process. So I recommend that if you slow yourself down a little bit, you may actually speed yourself up. And here's an example of what I mean. In this case, we want to select all of these faces for all of these pockets, all the little wall faces as well as the bottom faces. Now, if I make one selection, say I select this bottom face, we see that SOLIDWORKS is starting to predict what else I might select based on what we've chosen. So if I slow myself down, take a moment to see what SOLIDWORKS is offering me, it may speed myself up. So the first option selects the entire pocket and the cylindrical face that goes with the top boss. Now, if I move across here, it will give me different predictions based on the geometry. Now remember, this is an imported model, so it's just looking at model similarities, geometry similarities. Now, if we get to the fourth option, here we see that it selects the bottom faces, all of the wall faces, with one additional face that I don't need. But that's okay. If I select this option, you'll see that all of the faces are added to my selection box, and I simply just select the face that I don't want in the graphics area. From here, I can right-click to accept, and Delete and Patch takes care of the rest. It's removed all of the faces, and it still has left me with a solid body. Now from here, we want to create this symmetrical shape again, and there's 2 ways we can go about doing that in SOLIDWORKS. We can create the geometry as a feature and mirror that, or we can mirror it in the sketch. We'll take a look at both methods in this set of tips. Let's start by creating the geometry symmetrical in the sketch, and then we'll move back and do this as a feature. I'll select this back planar face, and we'll select Sketch, and from here we can start creating some geometry. Now, likely one of the first things you do when creating symmetrical geometry is place down a center line. The center line is accessible from within the line tool. Don't forget that any sketch entity can be used as a reference. For example, if this midpoint line was more convenient to use to create my center line, I can do that. From here, we just need to tell SOLIDWORKS that this is a reference line not to be used for any of the features. We can do that simply by clicking on whatever entity we want and selecting Construction Geometry from the In Context menu, or sliding directly over to the line's properties and saying For Construction. One of the other options that I like to use in these scenarios is infinite length for the line. We see when I check infinite length, this allows my line to go straight off the end of my graphics area regardless of my zoom level. This lets me know exactly where my line of symmetry is, no matter where I am in the process. Now we need to set up the symmetry. Again, there's 2 ways we can approach this in SOLIDWORKS. We can create the geometry and then mirror it, or we can mirror it as we're creating it. Now I prefer the second, though that tool is not by default on the sketching toolbar. So again, let's search for the tool. This particular tool is called Dynamic Mirror. Again, I'll use my S key and we'll start searching for Dynamic Mirror. As soon as I get a couple letters in, we see that Dynamic Mirror shows up in the search bar. Now I said that I use this tool on a regular basis, and I do, so it would make more sense to have this readily available on my toolbar. One of the tricks that the search commands has up its sleeve is we can drag directly off of the search commands right onto the command manager itself. This allows us to easily customize our command manager without going through Tools, Customize. From here, I can launch the tool. Now the dynamic mirror entities allows us to pre-select the line of symmetry, so all I have to do is select, in this case, my line, and we see that that puts a couple of dash marks across the line of symmetry, and the dynamic mirror tool stays depressed, indicating that it's being used. Now before we go create some geometry, there's one other tool that I'd like to mention, and that is that SOLIDWORKS gives us the ability to add dimensions as we're creating entities. It's called on-screen numeric input. Now personally, I don't really like the tool, but there's actually a secondary option that helps me out quite a bit when I'm using this approach. Let's go into the options. From within here, under Sketch, we'll see the option Enable on-screen numeric input on entity creation. If I check this on, you'll see that now we have a secondary option as to how this tool works. I have this checked on and it says create dimension only when a value is entered. What this allows us to do is enter a value when we want to, and it will add the dimension. If we don't add a value, we'll see that this will just leave this undefined and we can continue working. We'll say OK, and let's go ahead and we'll add some geometry. From here I'll use my S key, we'll grab the line tool, and we want to create one side of this shape. I'll select near where I want this to go, and look what happens. We see that my line is added, but it's added as a tangent line. This is because I clicked close to the tangency point on this circular edge reference. Now, most of the time I see this happen to people that will hit escape or drop the line tool, but that's not actually necessary. All we have to do is cross over and cross back the referenced line. We see that that will lock the line wherever that mouse movement occurs. Now we can see that I'm moving my line in the correct direction. We have cursor feedback for the autorelation that I need to be added, vertical, and we're getting a readout for what the dimension currently is. Now if I want to use on-screen numeric input, all I have to do is type in the value that I'd like to use and hit enter. In this case, I want this to be 10 millimeters. As soon as I hit enter, the line is set to that particular length, it adds the dimension, and now I can be on my way. Now I need to make some other geometry. Let's say we go over and across. But since I haven't added in dimensions for these, they're left undefined and it doesn't add any dimensions that I need to go modify. Maybe I don't want to dimension this as the overall length of this line. Now another thing happens as we're working along. You can see the dynamic mirror is also working with us. Every line that I create has been mirrored automatically over to the other side. Okay, let's back up a step and let's do this as a single sketch contour, and then we'll mirror this after the fact. So I'll turn off my dynamic mirror and I'll remove the geometry that I just created. In cases where we're trying to create one profile that will be mirrored after the fact, we see that that can cause some issues in dimensioning. If I grab my Smart Dimension tool, maybe we do know the dimension across this thickness. Well, most of us probably know at this point that if you select a line and you select a center line, as soon as you cross over the center line, it will double the dimension for you. You probably stumbled on this at least by accident. If I move this to the opposite side, it automatically doubles and I can put in a value, let's say 5 millimeters. What you may not know is this also applies to angle dimensions as well, but it's not so obvious. Here, if I select this angled line, I select the center line and I move across, it gives me the opposite dimension to the center line. Not exactly what I wanted. The trick is if you hit your Shift key on the keyboard, that will give you the doubled dimension for the angle. Now I can set this to whatever value I need. Let's go ahead and we'll finish off this geometry off to the side. I'd like to follow this contour up along this edge, so I'll select this edge, I'll use my S key, and we'll say offset entities. It's going in the right direction, so I want this to be 3 millimeters, and we'll hit enter. Now in cases like this, we may think about attaching these together and then trimming off the rest using the trim tool. What you may not realize is that the trim tool works in both directions. Let's turn on the trim tool again. I use my S key. In this case, I need this to extend, and this I need to be trimmed. If you hold the Shift key on your keyboard, you'll see that Shift will extend. When I release the Shift key, we're back to trim. So you can clean up awkward corners in one operation. Now that may still cause issues when we have something like this towards the top. Let's offset this edge on the top side. Here again, we'll select Offset Entities, 3 millimeters, and we'll say OK. The top end is easy to fix. Drag and drop, we get an auto relation, and that solves our problem. Now this corner is a little more awkward. We see that the endpoints are very close together, and there's not much room to trim in here. This leaves us with launching the trim tool, zooming way in, or maybe using our G key for the magnifying glass. Even so, it's a little bit awkward. In cases like this, I'll switch myself over to the corner trim, and this allows me to stay zoomed all the way out and simply select the pieces that I want to keep. I want to keep this leg and I want to keep this leg, and it's automatically cleaned up the rest for me. At this point, I'll go back, turn on my power trim since that's what I use the majority of the time, and say OK. Now from here, I'd like to add in the rest of the dimensions to finish this off, but many times I want to add them in quickly, or I might not know exactly which ones I need yet. In those scenarios, I'll use Fully Defined Sketch, which is available under Display Delete Relations. I also will customize this to my mouse gestures so I can swipe straight down and launch the Fully Defined Sketch tool. From here, all we need to do is tell it where we want to measure from. Let's say this bottom corner. And say OK. This will add in the rest of the dimensions that we need to fully define this sketch. In this case, just one. Now, if you have a keen eye, you've probably realized at this point we do not have a closed contour. This is an open contour as we haven't finished off the top in this section. Normally, you would probably select this line, convert entities, and then trim off the rest that you don't need, but that's not always necessary. Let's exit this sketch and we'll take a look at how we can use an open contour as if it were a closed contour by taking advantage of contour selection. In order to exit the sketch, I'll throw in another tip. One of my favorite ways to exit a sketch is to use the keyboard shortcut for the breadcrumbs. The D key on the keyboard will also bring the confirmation corner to your cursor, keeping you from having to move your cursor excessive amounts. Here we'll say Exit Sketch, and again we'll use the S key to access the extruded cut. All the way at the bottom of the extruded cut, you'll see Selected Contours, and we'll see that the selected contours will pick this up as if it were a closed contour, even though I don't have a sketch entity on the top. Now in this case, it's not going to add a sketch entity for me, but it's able to reference the model edge as if it were usable sketch geometry. From here, I can select the profile, I can set a distance, and we can accept. Now it's almost complete. Here we just want to add in a couple of fillets. Again, I'll use my S key to select the fillet tool, select one of my edges, and again, slow yourself down to speed yourself up. Don't forget about the filter. These short little edges can be a real nuisance to select, but my first filter picks up all of them for me. We can set the size and accept the command. At this point, we'd like to mirror the geometry, and here's a scenario that can become a little bit problematic. Oftentimes when we have pockets, we have overlapping fillets and things like that that are a little bit difficult to select from the graphics area. Normally I like to select them from the tree. However, once we've launched the mirror tool, it can be a little difficult to navigate the tree once it's in the graphics area. So in order to pre-select the tools, I actually like to box select directly within the tree. Most people are aware that we can box select from within the graphics area, but the tree accepts this as well. If we box select the features, now I've pre-selected them, and all I have to do is choose which plane I'd like to mirror them about, in this case, the right plane. Once we hit accept, all of those features will be carried over together. So there's my set of tips for this year's release event. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you back next week.
Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and our blog for more great content by clicking on the links in the description below.